Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm the host of the show, Joe Carson. It's a pleasure to be here. And we're always exciting to bring new guests, new people, new ideas, to really share with you some of the best practices, knowledge, and really help you, make the world a safer place. So I'm going to pass it over to Craig. Craig, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm really excited. I'm excited about today's conversation. You want to give the audience a bit of a background about who you are, what you do, and some interesting things about
absolutely, Joe. Thanks very much for having me on. And obviously, you couldn't get someone of interest today, so you've got me effectively. Craig Jones.
Absolutely not.
So recently retired from public service in the UK, about 40 years public service. My last position was at the National Crime Agency, part of a national cybercrime unit, but I've been seconded out from there to Interpol, where I've been running their Interpol Global Cybercrime Program in Singapore from 2019 up until July this year, effectively. So, really happy to be here and have a discussion with you about all things cyber.
Absolutely. So where did it all start? What was your journey? How did you get into this situation? What was your background originally? Because this probably wasn't the place where you thought you'd end up.
No, I joined the Royal Navy when I was 16. And my first sort of assignment, you go into the careers office. And I think they obviously have a quota to fill. And the quota they're looking to fill that day was in communications. So I went into the Royal Navy as a junior radio operator, second class, and got sent up to do my basic training, but I ended up at a place called HMS Mercury. And I got taught to touch type. And as a 16-year-old being taught to touch type many years ago, and you will work ages out later, but doing A, S, D, F, J, K, L, E, and I thought, what a waste of time. Morse code, I enjoyed doing Morse code, but actually that was the start of that digital journey for me. So in communications then, when I joined my first ship, lowest of the low, your job was to do all those menial tasks. So I used to take out at 8 o'clock in the evening, probably about 20 boxes, unscrew them, pull all the wires out, use the codes, and then start physically wiring the codes for encryption. And as you changed over at Midnight Zulu, you just crossed your fingers and hope as the ticker tape came through, words came through, and not gobbledygook on the screen effectively. And I've just waved my hands and we've got some balloons coming up. So
I love that. That's fantastic. We'll keep that going.
And then I had one too many Sunday nights in railway stations going back on trains to ships. Decided for a career change and went to the police. That was in the sort of early 90s. Was going through that investigation route, unfortunately got injured on duty and pensioned out. So I had to sort of pivot on what was I going to do then. And actually went into an organisation called the Federation of Communications Services, FCS, because my last role in the police when I had... sorry, I've got a reconnecting thing here. Apologies, Joe. That was just a thing going around on my screen.
No problem.
That's growing. Yep.
I'll correct it a little bit later.
Right. So
you'll see the blurring stuff, but it's we should record an upload.
I had the Wheel of Doom going around on my screen. So I came out from policing and went to the Federation of Communication Services. And my last role in police, I've been looking at mobile phones. So how could law enforcement use mobile phones effectively to go after the bad guys? And it was when we still had analog phones, so there was no card in there. And we did cell site analysis and mapping, and it was uber secret at that time. This was like the biggest secret. What we had was criminal groups were stealing mobile phones and re-chipping them. So I went to the Federation of Communication Services and was basically then training police about how to investigate mobile phone crime, how to go after the criminals. But it was out of a physical sense then because they were using phones. Then went off to the probation service and other things, but ended up back in forensics, in the police. And then started that digital journey properly in about 2000, when we really started looking at law enforcement, one about how we could utilize digital forensics, but also draw data sets out from the criminals. And then that led into the cyber piece. So one of my roles in 2012 was to set up a regional cybercrime unit. How do you go about that? Who's done it? Well, no one has. Okay, well, how do we do this in the best way to start developing a team regionally? And then ended up with the National Crime Agency in 2017. Under the National Cybersecurity Program, not long after WannaCry, and that's probably a story we can get into because I've got an interesting story on that as well. And then 2019, got supported in an application to Interpol to be their Director of Cybercrime, got through the interview process, and then I found myself sitting in an office in Singapore running a global cybercrime program. And here we are today, maybe 6 years later, retired, maybe a few more wrinkles, a few more grey hairs, but yeah, there we go.
I'm in a similar situation with the wrinkles and the gray hair. That's for sure. No, but that's I think what is your background is fascinating. Definitely when I hear you talking about in the Navy talking about communications, that's a huge foundation because of understanding about everything we do today in security. All comes down to communications. A lot of people try to say kind of expertise with ham radios because of the connections and the background. They're so kind of still running on some of those kind of older systems and fundamental
your D, E, F, 1 and F. Yeah, if you want to start talking propagation, D, E, F, 1 and F, 2 layers at night, then combining and things like that, we can have a whole separate conversation on that.
So, but I mean, one of the things is for me is absolutely when you talk about the timelines as well is that through those early 2000s and the 2010 plus is that the crime wave, the way that crime was being done was going through a massive transformation. Where people were no longer going into doing the old kind of brick and mortar type of crime. They were moving online. What was some of the early crime things that you started saying, doing the forensic side? I think because one of the things is there was this transition where it was about, using technology in traditional crime, to your point, mobile phones communicating and so forth. Then it moved into, being 100% in the cyber side. What were some of the kind of transitions you saw? What was some of the interesting kind of moves or techniques at that time?
Yeah, I think what we saw is exactly that in the digital economy that the internet then helped support, develop, and grow, allowed companies, organizations, businesses to be more effective, reach audiences in different ways, do different ways of working. Criminals just did exactly the same. I think go back to why was the FBI formed back in the day was because all of a sudden you had criminals had access to motor vehicles and they realized they went over state lines. They could do a crime in one area, drive across a straight line, they wouldn't be touched. Now, that's an interesting analogy for where we are at the moment around the criminals online around the world. But exactly that, the criminals looked at an opportunity. It's like everybody didn't quite maybe understand what was involved to start with, but then realized, hey, we can make some money here. And actually, chances of being caught for doing this initial scam or the tele-frauds where they would set up a premium rate line, divert phones and things like that, so they'll make money that way. And then they became, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but as the technology became more sophisticated and more adaptable, the criminal groups adapted in that environment as well.
Absolutely. The bar came lower from the onboarding technology, made a much more broader perspective of everyone having access to it.
For sure. I mean, let's go back maybe even just 10 years. Some of the tools that we can just sit and download on our phones now, that was state level capability. Only a few of those states would be able to access that. And I think this is where we're going to have the blurring within that cyber space where is it a state actor, near state actor, is it a mercenary, is it an organized crime group, is it a single script kiddie? We've got such a wide range in that space. It then makes it hard sometimes for law enforcement to differentiate who are the threat actors. And historically and still now, law enforcement is set up to deal with crime on a local level. There's always a victim locally. So, that's not going to change. Why one of policing, protecting communities? But when we come at looking at that outcome around arresting a criminal and that law enforcement outcomes, judicial outcomes, locking people up, yeah, we can lock people up. And that does give, shall we say, society a break. When we lock a criminal up, it protects society from that criminal. But we don't see that so much in this space. And what we haven't done effectively, I would say, at this moment of time, and the challenge that I had at Interpol was how do we change that model a little bit? How do we make sure that we're not going to be judged on the amount of arrests we're going to do? Because that's not really that efficient. How do we look at the vulnerabilities and actually do that community-based policing with effectively the private sector or the industry? Because they're the ones that are able to make those changes. Like, why is it that the brakes improved on cars? Well, cars got faster, there was an accident, and people started, being injured. Seatbelts. So there were improvements made, but that was sometimes pushed within a certain sector or industry, and you see that in a certain country. So some countries have got really great roads, great infrastructure, great cars, and you probably mirror that in terms of their cybersecurity and platforms. You go to other less developed countries, you will see that level of technology in the vehicles, maybe not as high, or the infrastructure, but actually you will see it a little bit higher within the tools, because they're able to reach in and grab those tools from wherever around the world.
Absolutely reminds me of all the places I've been driving around the world, where you got some countries where the infrastructure is really good, where you have those guardrails. You've got the rules, you've got guardrails, you've got signs, you've got warnings. And then there are countries where basically it's just a free-for-all. And there's no rules, no guardrails, and you just have to know what the other person is going to be doing and try to avoid.
And also underlying all that is, that's done for safety. So when we have the language and the conversation, we're looking at keeping pedestrians, cyclists, drivers safe. And people can identify with that. I think if we then use that analogy in cyber and we start talking about security, technology, vulnerabilities, but the language doesn't quite translate then in terms of your general public or communities under, cybersecurity. I've got to keep, updates, patching. What? No, don't get it. Just click, get me online sort of thing. So sometimes the analogies work very well, but sometimes maybe they don't. Yeah.
So I've got one kind of story that I kind of want to share with you and kind of get your insights into it as well, because I think it was important. It was part of the transition I find when working from cybercrime and then also working with law enforcement as well. Was a number of years ago, I was brought in to help. It was a government that asked me to look at the forensics and kind of a specific case. And it was basically, it was an incident where a government official had received a death threat. And it was via basically email. So they'd received an email, death threats, that they're going to harm the person. And getting into the forensics and looking and going back to tracing all the sources and looking at the multiple hops that email had made. So one of the things that, of course, it came from another country. And then you had to work with that country, law enforcement, for the ISP, in order to get them to share data. Because if you don't find out information about where the source was, once it leaves your borders, it gets very, very challenging. Lucky enough, these countries had good relations, so they were willing to share the information about the account and where it was signed up from. And all of this led back to an internet cafe. So in the same country where the threat was made. So we kind of left the country, out to the borders, came back in, and then so basically them working with the law enforcement, it goes all these dots around the world and basically comes back. So ended up getting into where we had basically information about where the origin came, which was an internet cafe. And I get into then where it was then handed over to local law enforcement to go and collect the evidence. So they got a court order, they got all of the information, and they went into the internet cafe, and their instructions was to collect computers, is to gather all the computers in order to then go and start analyzing which machine was this originally sent from. Now, at the time, the local law enforcement they weren't ready for these types of cyber or warrants. When they saw what was in the collection order, was computers, and they went in and they collected computers. But when we went in afterwards, we found that actually they only collected like desktops. There was so much other things like network devices, there was games consoles, there was lots of other devices in there. And we had to go back and had to get a request in to go and collect like pretty much everything. So eventually going back to finding out, of course, the problem was the internet cafe. They didn't keep good records of who was coming and going. It was all paper, scribbles, it was all cash in hand a lot of times. So it was very, very difficult to find out who the person was. But ultimately, when we ended up finding the original source, the email was sent from a PlayStation, which was from the internet cafe. But because of that, local law enforcement, it was that time where we were kind of cross-educating law enforcement into letting them know, what types of systems they need to be collecting, what things they need to be looking into. And eventually, of course, they find the person of high confidence, and that person was then put under watch. But it was an interesting case for me because it was showing kind of where the cyber knowledge and the law enforcement knowledge was starting to converge. Have you seen that type of kind of I guess for Interpol, that's something that is probably one of the main initiatives, is to educate and to get into cooperation. How has that been transitioning over the years?
Yeah, exactly that. I think what happened is we started seeing these crime types, and a report would come in.
Okay.
And quite often you say, well, it's not really our jurisdiction, it's not in our area, it's not this. And you go through quite a lot of effort not to take the report, potentially, because you knew or didn't know how you were going to investigate it effectively, or what was the likelihood, coming back to my comments earlier, of the judicial outcome. Now, in your case, that's a great example where at least you had it in the country. So you probably had, the legislation was the same. So you had a good start there. But then you saw the same things, and the same things we're seeing now is, what's the evidence you're looking for? And how can you secure that evidence? Noting that historically, some of our investigations, we would just go in and seize everything. So actually that business would stop functioning. And then how do we then analyze that evidence? So it's not just like going in, oh, you saw this. Okay, let's write a witness statement, did it, signed, done. You're done in 30 minutes. It's all the after bits to it as well. And that comes back to my early comment about law enforcement being effectively set up to deal with these type of cases. What we've seen, certainly from the Interpol side, we had sort of 4 objectives within our strategy. One was understanding the threat picture. So looking at that criminal, I've got a thumbs up now, and the threat picture. We then had setting up operational teams. So in countries or regions, operational teams do that operational activity, but we had to keep it at a fairly high bar. Crimes that were causing high harm, high impact, high volume, or of high interest. Thirdly, capability capacity building, that's the key one. So I divided the world into a triangle. You had countries of 196. Top tier were really good capability, good capacity. But as you said, sometimes countries don't speak to each other. So Interpol's role there is to make sure we act and facilitate as that key neutral interlocker. And I'm probably maybe getting some experience on that side of it. The middle tier of those countries that had some capability, and we could help provide platforms in order for them to communicate and share information and evidence, but also hook them into the private sector as well. I mean, the bottom tier of those countries really didn't have that capability or capacity, would not be able to investigate that type of crime you mentioned, and still not able to now. But where we can work with them is understanding who the victims are, who's been impacted from cybercrime, which then comes back into the first one about understanding that threat picture. So we're taking a global challenge and trying to deal with it on a global scale, but really trying to break it down into manageable parts, and where Interpol tools and platforms can be used in terms of sharing information and best practice, or operational activities and coordinating operations, or building out capability and capacity. I would caution on this as law enforcement, we love a good training course. We love a certificate on a Friday afternoon, but how effective is that training? So one of the things I introduced as part of the program is, when we did training, it had to come with an operational activity. So whether it was compromised servers and ISPs or things like that, we trained law enforcement how to deal with it. We gave them the tools and then said, right, here's an operation you can go and do now.
It's really interesting. One of the things that we went through this whole transition where ransomware became one of the top kind of criminal activities, and that was always a massive challenge globally for the organizations in countries around the world. And I think one of the momental shifts was during the WannaCry and NotPetya. And I never forget having to work around the clock in the months after, helping organizations recover and get back to operations. How was that time and what was your experience during that time? Because that was probably one of the realizations. It was the pinnacle point where criminal truly went 100% online. It was like, this is now cross-border. They can operate. They can get paid from anywhere through cryptocurrency. How was that kind of experience for you?
So I think we were sort of on this steady curve and trajectory, and then I would call certainly those cases as high harm, high impact, and high interest. But actually, the scale was high volume as well at that time. And all of a sudden, we had this situation. If I take the WannaCry one, where on a Friday lunchtime we started mobilizing, getting the calls, and then mobilizing internationally, nationally, regionally, and locally. So I was driving down to Ilfracombe at the time, and there's an instant connection there, as Mark Such, and was in Ilford at that moment in time in his bedroom, at his mum and dad's house. What we had to do then was understand, well, what role does law enforcement have in this at this moment in time? Where's that global coordination? So we did lots of work going out to hospitals saying, okay, well, we need to seize this, this, and this because we need to understand what's the now, how does it work? It really was like a water spout, effectively. It's massive, loads of water gushing out, effectively. Okay, we've got to try and capture some of that. When we stood back and reflected on it afterwards and looked at what our responses were, and we did the wash up and things like that, what law enforcement did at the time, we're not funded to do under the program. So all of a sudden, we had law enforcement go off and do a load of work. And what it meant was we stopped doing our day jobs. So those investigations that we were working on, because we had this major incident, so it's a bit like a bomb going off. You have a major incident, you all go quickly to it, and then you can go back to your day job. But what happened with WannaCry is people stayed on that investigation. So other investigations didn't get the attention they deserved or should have had at that time. And that was a real wake-up call, I would say, for law enforcement in the UK. But also one of the things that underlined to me was that global coordination wasn't there as well for law enforcement. So Interpol or Europol, but Poland, they had a really key position in that. It's a bit like, you can have all these plans set up how you're going to deal with things. And when the incident happens, those plans fail normally, but then you don't always practice those plans. One of the pieces at Interpol we were looking at doing is how do we coordinate? How do we make sure the right people are doing the right things? And I think we saw it during the attack on the Irish Healthcare Service, 2021, 2022, 2021, I think it was, where there was a huge amount of interest, and the Garda were getting loads of inquiries from around the world. Well, how's this? What's this? And what Interpol's role was there, almost to act as a buffer then for them to say, look, put those inquiries into us. We can help filter that out and be a conduit into a single entity in a country, because let's face it, they had their hands full at the time trying to get that all sorted out. So, coming back to how we're maturing, are we there yet on the journey? No. Are we in a better place than we were, when WannaCry happened? Yes. And this is going to be a continued journey for law enforcement, but it does come back to those basic roles, responsibilities, and actually how much resource do you put into something where you achieve those desired outputs and outcomes. Put my program manager head on and project manager head on here. What about the resource that goes in, and what about the outputs effectively?
How to get the most maximum efficiency and output as you possibly can is critical here, because to your point is the world is not all in the same maturity level. Sometimes I've always find that in my career, when I get pulled into incident response or digital forensics, I always find is that sometimes you end up dealing with a country where those laws don't apply, or the legal framework doesn't support you. How would you approach those situations? The world of laws is so different across the world, and law enforcement also kind of operate differently as well. So how do you get everyone almost to the same level? What do you kind of prioritize?
So first we prioritize at a national level. So you make sure you've got the legislation in place nationally. Secondly, you look at it on the regional level. So look at those like-minded countries that can work together effectively to aggregate your resources. Finally, at an international level, such as Interpol, what I did in my time there was I set out resolutions and recommendations. And this is the boring stuff, but this is about having as an international organization which works on resolutions with 196 member countries, getting them all to agree to investigate cybercrime. And guess what? They all signed up to it in 2021 in our General Assembly in Turkey. Then on a regional basis, putting recommendations in place.
And that's amazing.
I had bits of paper and all of the law enforcement signed that. So it didn't matter about geopolitics. Interpol's a neutral organization, non-political, non-military, non-racist, non-religion. So we can't deal with any of those. We don't deal with crime. But then just recently at the United Nations, we've got the new convention to counter the use of information and communications technology for criminal purposes. Really trips off the tongue, but 2.5 years negotiation by diplomats in the UN to give us a common language or a convention for law enforcement. It's the first one in over 20 years. It's taken 2.5 years to negotiate. I led Interpol's, work there at the United Nations, joining the Navy, doing the boxes. Never imagined I'd be sat at the United Nations making statements, but we gave 4 priorities that we wanted to see in that convention. We wanted to say, look, prioritize cybercrime and international cooperation between countries. 1. 2, make sure we level up the capability and capacity. So bring the countries closer together, narrow that gap and build the bridges between them. The third one was around don't duplicate. Use the tools and platforms that are out already. We're really good in law enforcement at saying, oh, we need to do this. It's normally not a new idea. Someone's already done it, but what we didn't do is implement it properly. So using the correct platforms, making sure countries could access what they needed. And the final one was working with the private sector. That's the one that didn't get into the body at the end, unfortunately. But that's coming back to your point, make sure there's that common language and understanding. Now, this will take years. This comes back to that step change in policing, but being able to use that. So when I have, let's just say, an operation between Brazil and Spain, where you had a whole bunch of cyber criminals in Spain designing malware that would impact Android users or banks in Spain and Europe, they could actually then speak and work together. Or you could have countries that maybe wouldn't have those political alignments, where Interpol can then come out, act as that neutral interlocutor. I've got some examples of maybe where that didn't work and could work in the future, but a lot of that comes back to who is it we're trying to protect here? We're trying to protect our communities, and that's a basic tenet of law enforcement policing in any country, is we're there to protect our communities. We're not there to effectively get involved in the politics. That's a whole different level of conversation for other different forums and things like that. But it comes back to where, these tools used to be available to only states. Now you see those blurring of the lines effectively between state actors, near state actors, non-state actors, who's doing what to who effectively.
Absolutely. It's because one of the challenges I've always had is that I've seen in recent years is you get, I refer to them as the cyber mercenaries, which are basically they wear multiple hats. One day they might do crime, traditional crime just for monetary focus for themselves. Sometimes they might be brought in as a service provider for another criminal organization to specialize in just initial access brokers or to create the malware. And then if the government of that country where they're located comes in and says they need to operate in certain types of campaigns for them to continue operating their criminal campaign. So it's kind of, some of those lines sometimes blur, and it gets, for me, it's always been challenging about which the government sometimes, they keep enough distance from those mercenaries that's really hard to tell what's the motive. Because I always get down to what's the motive intention, who's the victim.
And that's that plausible deniability. But we know, cyber criminals are there to make money. That's the bottom line in this. So how do we disrupt that model effectively? And some of that is about ripping down infrastructure, but we don't want to rip down the infrastructure that is enabling other things as well. So again, this is the challenge about, you don't go and ban all motor vehicles because someone's used that motor vehicle to go and commit a robbery. It's understanding what are the sort of safety measures you can put in there to make sure that it's not used for a purpose, but it was not intended for. And, when we look at some of these user cases and the technology being developed, it's absolutely brilliant. But criminals are really now quick to monetize that. And they are, exceptionally good at that sort of proof of concept and then turning that into a business model very, very quickly, effectively.
Absolutely. The intelligence sharing and the acceleration I've seen in adoption of the technology has been so fast, where I've seen even the latest cyber criminals using generative AI in order to do translations. Estonia used to be very protected because the language was so complex. It's no longer the case. We can't rely on language being a barrier. That barrier is gone. So now you have to think about what's other techniques, and that means better educating the citizens into being able to detect and see scams and be able to see where, monetary, crimes are. So that sometimes those technologies mean that you have to shift your focus a little bit into where you can be as effective as best as you can, because sometimes those things that you did in the past are no longer effective today.
And it's also down as us as users. So I just arrived in Dubai yesterday morning. I need to get my eSIM sorted out. I need to get back online for some of the apps I used to have. And I got really frustrated because I also got two-factor authentication. I don't have access to wireless. And actually, what wireless am I accessing? I'm thinking in my mind the worst case scenarios. And it took me quite a while to get some of those things back on my phone. And I found that frustrating. Now, if I'm finding that frustrating, but I'm understanding why I'm doing that or need to do that, other people don't. They just want to get on there as quickly as possible. And I think this is where that maturity in building the safety, and I'm using my words carefully here, the safety into our use online and that awareness in the psyche of the public, the users, the business, we've all gotten used to everything being very quick, very on, it's there in seconds. And if it's not, it damn well should be. So again, that's a challenge. And again, that is a long journey for everybody, isn't it? But the problem is technology changes so quickly, we can't afford that time. So we need to make sure that technology is protecting us, or that safety is being baked in at source, so we don't actually even notice the safety aspect of it. We just know actually when we go on that platform and use that tool, we're pretty well protected.
Yeah, the guardrails are there by design, which I'm a big fan of Jenny's release. This is an initiative, which is the Secure Our World, which is for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and they also focus on security by design, which is translates into security by default. Is that the guardrails had to be in place, had to be there, and has to be for everyone. And you might decide to opt out or do something different, but it's on by default. It's by design.
But I think also, and I keep using the word safety, don't I? We talk very much about community safety. When the technology space, we talk about security. And we know in the technology space that sort of helps sell things as well. Safety doesn't sound that, okay, whatever. But the reason why we have health and safety is because people were losing limbs or being killed by, improper use of equipment, poor maintenance, bad equipment, bad practices. And it's like that thing when things go bang or start bleeding, that elicits a response. It's still that tie-in with, well, it's a bit of a white-collar crime. It doesn't impact on someone personally, but actually it does. There's always someone at the end of that chain that directly impacts on when there's a cybercrime, effectively.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It comes down to is really the impact, and sometimes for organizations, sometimes safety actually has a bigger budget as well. Is that because you want to make sure that from a life perspective, and sometimes from a safety, that's where sometimes the prioritization is.
Yeah.
So as technology is changing quite quickly and advancing, how does Interpol and how do you stay up to date? What's some of the resources? Are you still innovating? Are you looking at new technologies and platforms and a way to make sure? So what's some of the ways that Interpol stays up to date, and what's some of the resources that you leverage to keep moving forward?
So we've got fantastic resources. I did have fantastic resources when I was at Interpol, but just in terms of 196 countries, we can reach into 196 countries. We can reach into law enforcement in those countries, but also we have the private partners that we work with. So our Gateway initiative allowed us to work directly with cybersecurity companies such as, let's see, some of them would be Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Alto, Trend Micro, Skitter, Group IB, Bizone, Kaspersky. Now, that's a really broad spread of companies, but under our rules of processing data, we can bring data sets in from them. But more importantly, our member countries can access those companies as well through us. So again, understanding what the current threat landscape looks like, but also what are the criminals doing? And more importantly, identifying the infrastructure and the criminals. And that helps us then build those operational activities, coming back to what I was saying about understanding the threat picture, building out those regional desks. So one of the pieces we did in Africa was we put teams into Africa, seconded officials paid for by the UK government through project funding, private partners, and we joined all of that together with some training around operations and doing surge activities in the internet service providers, or going after the organized crime groups in Nigeria, doing the arrests directly in the communities where the criminals were operating. Now, I mentioned Nigeria on purpose there because they were willing to do that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we see in countries identification of cyber criminals, but then no prosecution or disruption of those criminals. And what we were doing at Interpol was trying to call that out effectively, because remember what I said a moment ago about they all signed up this resolution to counter cybercrime. So why is it that, Interpol can't be used as a conduit to go to Russia or into Indonesia or into Brazil or into the US, where cyber criminals are identified, and then we act as that neutral interlocutor to provide that information into that country and have those countries working together effectively. Sometimes we see that, but, the geopolitics, to be very honest in this, sometimes do get in the way of policing internationally effectively, especially in the sort of cyber environment.
Absolutely. I think what you're doing is amazing. Well, I definitely think it's something that we need the cooperation and transparency and work together, because that's the only way we have forward. If we have too many silos, that cybercrime will just continue to flourish and accelerate. If we work together and cooperate, and to your point is working with the private partnerships and intelligence sharing, that's huge, because I think that really gives you insights into the techniques, the tools, the mindsets, the motives. And if you're able to, if you got victims in many countries, if you're able to really get to the source of the country and they will cooperate to mitigate it, that will, ultimately make the world a safer place. So I can't thank you enough for everything you've done over the years. We've worked together with some amazing people. So.
Yeah. I just think on that point, you also hit the piece on there is, when we look at the private sector cooperating, there is commercial advantages to be had in this as well. And I think maybe in the last 10 years prior, that stopped some of the cooperation going. But I think now companies and organizations are seeing the benefits of coming together. But some of the stuff they're doing, they're doing it themselves now. So they're almost taking on that, and I call it creating communities to protect communities. So they created a community. Now, we've looked at regulation as well in countries, and that sometimes can have a knock-on effect through secondary consequences where people don't want to report. But what we're starting to see now is the private sector coming together more and more and actually providing that information into the communities, whether it's into governments, whether it's into the wider cybersecurity industry, whether it's into law enforcement. So we're seeing that developing now, which I look on as a really, really positive piece from where I started Interpol to where it is now. And don't get me wrong, it's going to even improve significantly more in the next couple of years with Neil in there as a new director. It will improve, and it has to improve as well effectively.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. The significant improvements I've seen in over the years has been amazing. And it comes down to, a lot of what you started and what will continue to go forward. So, Craig, it's been fantastic having you on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to have a follow at some point. I want to continue the conversation because I've got so many questions and, stories kind of and things to share with. But for the audience, I think you've been of huge value, kind of really giving them insights into what Interpol's kind of, where the responsibility is, where they're saving, making the world a safer place, and really kind of bringing that cooperation. Because I remember, when I worked in GDPR to get, 28 countries to cooperate together to create a cyber framework and regulation.
Yeah.
And then we realized that actually it doesn't apply in international waters. Now we need the maritime to go, and that was like 180 countries. To get 194 countries to cooperate together is impressive. So that's something that's I kind of applaud, and I think definitely those initiatives, me and my family and everyone that I know in a safer place today.
Thanks very much, Joe. Yeah, my role is to keep my mum safe at the end of the day.
Exactly. It's to keep our social sphere, everyone we interact with. Anyway, if the audience want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way if they have questions or follow-up?
They find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there effectively, so feel free to look at me and ping me a question or something on there. I mean, I'm sure if people come to you, Joe, you can point in my direction. Well, I'm not going anywhere soon. I'm now doing my own thing, which is great. I don't have a government employer anymore. I'm the employer of myself. So that allows me a certain leeway now. So I'm looking forward to, new opportunities in the next few years as well.
So looking forward to kind of catching up with you more in the near future. So many thanks, Craig. It's been awesome having you on. So for everyone, make sure, this hopefully has been educational, gives you a bit of insights, and let's work together. Let's cooperate. Let's share information. Let's be transparent. Let's make the world a safer place for everyone online. So tune in every 2 weeks for the 401 Access Tonight podcast, and look forward to seeing you on future episodes and shows. So thank you. Take care and stay safe.